I want you to just take a second and imagine, like, holding a rock right in the palm of your hand.
Right, just a normal everyday rock.
Yeah, exactly. Like a heavy piece of granite or, maybe a chunk of limestone you'd find on a hiking trail. In our daily human experience, that stone feels like the ultimate physical absolute.
Oh, absolutely. Feels permanent.
Right. It feels entirely permanent. I mean, we literally build monuments out of stone because it projects this aura of a static, unchanging
It
reality.
acts as an anchor for us. Like
I've
for
got it.
human time frames, the stone feels like it's always been there, exactly in that state, and, always will be.
But the wild thing is, the reality is that the feeling of permanence you get from holding that rock, it's a complete temporal illusion.
Yeah, a massive trick of the mind.
You are being tricked by the incredibly short duration of a human lifespan. Because what you're actually holding in your hand is merely a transient and honestly a highly unstable thermodynamic phase.
Just a snapshot, really.
Exactly. It's a single frozen frame in a kinetic process that's been running for billions of years, depending on the exact pebble you're holding. I mean, it was once a seafloor cemetery teeming with microscopic life.
Right. Or shifting river delta.
Or, a churning pool of superheated mantle material.
Oh.
Or, and this is the most staggering one to me, it could be the thermonuclear interior of a dying star.
Which is just mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It really is. So, today we are taking a deep dive into the transmuting crust narrative. We have a seriously formidable stack of sources to analyze today, and our mission is to fundamentally dismantle that illusion of geological stasis for you.
And we have some incredible new data to look at, too.
We really do. We're going to be examining a groundbreaking June 2025 study on Earth's rhythmic mantle pulse, which is happening right beneath Africa.
Yeah, that one is fascinating.
And we're also going to unpack an August 2025 paper that expands the whole conceptual framework of the rock cycle to a literal cosmic scale. Plus, we've got a series of deep geological analyses detailing the molecular physics of chalk, diagenesis, and marble.
Right, and the intention here is to seamlessly connect these things. We want to take the microscopic biological mechanisms of the past and link them with the molecular physics happening deep within the Earth's crust today.
And then ultimately tie all of that back to the astrophysics of the cosmos, right?
Exactly, because, we tend to silo these disciplines out of academic convenience. Like biology stays in one department, geology is in another, astrophysics is in a third.
Right, everyone in their own little bubble.
Yeah, but the life cycle of a stone completely ignores those arbitrary boundaries. To understand why stasis on this planet is an illusion, we really have to look at the continuous, unified system.
Okay, so let's unpack this. And I think we should start by going back to the late Cretaceous epoch, which is roughly, 100 to 66 million years ago?
Yeah, right in that window.
And we're going to focus on a material that seems incredibly mundane, which is chalk.
Right. Something we associate with, like blackboards and climbing gyms.
Exactly, just totally ordinary stuff. But when you look at the paleoclimatology of the late Cretaceous, we are dealing with a severe, extreme hothouse environment on Earth.
A very different world than today.
And totally different. Driven by massive volcanic outgassing, the atmospheric CO2 levels were just astronomical compared to what we have now, and there were no polar ice caps at all.
None. Zero ice at the poles.
Right, so that lack of ice, combined with the thermal expansion of the oceans because the water was so warm, resulted in global sea levels that were exceptionally high, like they were flooding vast portions of the continental interiors.
Which is key, because the result of that flooding was the formation of these vast epicontinental shelves.
Okay, wait, explain what an epicontinental shelf is for a second.
Sure, so you basically had massive sections of what is now Europe and North America submerged under relatively shallow, very warm marine environments. They're essentially shallow seas sitting right on top of the continental crust.
Okay, got it.
And because these shallow seas were flooded onto the continents, they were receiving a constant influx of nutrients from terrestrial runoff, like rivers just dumping nutrients into the water.
Right, so it's basically like a giant warm nutrient soup.
Exactly. It created a highly stable, nutrient-dense incubator. And that environment allowed specific biospheres to undergo these massive, sustained population explosions.
And the most consequential of those were the coccolithophores.
Yes, the coccolithophores.
Okay, so these are a specific classification of microscopic, single-celled planktonic algae.
They're tiny, microscopic.
But they are unique because they essentially synthesize their own armor. Like they literally pull calcium and carbonate ions directly out of the ambient seawater around them, and they metabolize those ions to construct these intricate microscopic plates of calcite.
The called coccoliths.
Right, coccoliths. And they build these plates around their cellular structure, right?
Yeah, they are basically tiny biological factories precipitating mineral structures. And because the environmental conditions on those epicontinental shelves were so optimal, so warm and nutrient-rich, their populations were staggering,
Yeah.
just incomprehensibly huge.
But their lifespans are super short, aren't they?
Oh, incredibly short,
Yeah.
like days or weeks. So when they die, or, when they're consumed by microzooplankton and excreted as dense fecal pellets,
Wait, excreted as fecal pellets, so we're talking about plankton poop here.
literally plankton poop, yes, the organic matter inside them largely decays, but that inorganic calcite armor, the coccoliths, that remains intact.
Okay.
So those microscopic calcite plates detach, and they just begin this slow descent to the seafloor.
Right, and the literature refers to this as a pelagic rain. I love that term.
Very poetic.
It is. It's this continuous microscopic snowstorm of biological debris just drifting down through the water column. But the sheer scale of geological time involved here is really difficult to conceptualize.
It really is. Because the accumulation rates for this calcareous ooze on the seafloor are incredibly slow.
Like, how slow are we talking?
The data shows it took thousands of years to build up just 1 to 2 centimeters of this sediment.
Wow. Thousands of years for a couple of centimeters.
Yeah. Yet because this pelagic rain continued uninterrupted for tens of millions of years across the Cretaceous period, those microscopic accumulations eventually built deposits exceeding 500 meters in thickness.
500 meters, that is just staggering. And this is the structural foundation of, like, the White Cliffs of Dover, right? And the Cliffs of Etretat in France.
Exactly. Every single gram of that towering chalk formation you see at Dover contains billions of fragmented coccoliths.
Billions per gram. So, okay, if you take a step back and look at the macro structure of the White Cliffs of Dover, you aren't just looking at a pretty rock face. You are observing a 100-million-year-old biological cemetery.
That's exactly what it is. The entire cliff face is a monument to a continuous biological process operating at a microscopic scale over deep time.
Okay, but taking that data and applying it to the modern oceans introduces a glaring friction point for me.
Right. The ocean covers over 70% of the planet today.
Exactly. And plankton still exists and they still die. So if chalk is just compacted microscopic calcite shells, the logical conclusion is that the entire abyssal ocean floor today should just be a massive solid block of chalk.
It seems like it should be, yeah.
But the bathymetric surveys obviously show that is not the case at all. So why isn't the ocean floor just all chalk today?
So the variable there is the vertical chemistry of the water column. There is this strict thermodynamic boundary in the ocean known as the carbonate compensation depth, or the CCD.
It's CCB,
It fluctuates a bit based on latitude and the specific ocean basin, but it generally sits at a depth of around 4,500 meters.
Okay, pretty deep.
Yeah, very deep. And the solubility of calcium carbonate is not uniform throughout the ocean. It is highly dependent on pressure, temperature, and the concentration of dissolved carbon dioxide.
Okay, so we're dealing with Henry's law here, right? The solubility of gases.
Exactly. As you go deeper into the abyssal ocean, the water pressure increases exponentially, and the temperature drops to near freezing.
Right, it's dark and freezing cold.
And under those specific conditions, seawater can actually hold significantly more dissolved carbon dioxide.
Okay, so more CO2 in the deep water. What does that do?
That increased dissolved CO2 reacts with the water to form carbonic acid. And that carbonic acid naturally lowers the pH of the deep ocean, making it slightly more acidic.
Oh, I see.
So above the CCD in the shallower water, the seawater is supersaturated with respect to calcite. The coccolith shells can fall through that upper water column and accumulate on the shallow epicontinental shelves without dissolving.
Right, because the water there isn't as acidic or pressurized, so they pile up into those 500-meter thick oozes we see in the geological record.
Exactly. But if those same shells fall into the abyssal plains, meaning anything below that 4,500-meter boundary, they enter an environment that is aggressively undersaturated with calcite.
Because of the acid and the pressure.
Right. The high pressure, low temperature, and slightly acidic conditions cause the crystal lattice of the calcite to become highly unstable. The shell literally dissolves back into its constituent calcium and carbonate ions before it can ever be incorporated into a permanent sedimentary record.
Wow. It just vanishes back into the water. So the epicontinental seas of the Cretaceous were the perfect incubator precisely because they were shallow enough to sit safely above that dissolution boundary.
Exactly. The biology could accumulate without the deep ocean thermodynamics stripping it all away.
Okay, so we have these massive piles of biogenic calcareous ooze sitting on the seafloor, but I mean, ooze is just wet mud.
Right, just biological mud.
And a 500-meter pile of mud does not have the sheer strength to form a towering cliff face like Dover. So, the transition from soft biogenic sediment to solid rock, how does that happen?
For that, we have to look at the molecular mechanics of diagenesis.
Diagenesis. Okay, define that for us.
Diagenesis encapsulates the entire suite of physical and chemical alterations that sediment undergoes after its initial deposition. But crucially, this is before it reaches the extreme pressure and temperature thresholds of true metamorphism.
So it's sort of the in-between stage.
Yeah, exactly. We are analyzing a kinetic environment generally defined by temperatures under 300 degrees Celsius and pressures around 1 kilobar.
Okay, and a kilobar is roughly 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level.
It's an immense amount of pressure.
Right, so the overlying weight of all that accumulating sediment, the lithostatic pressure, is just staggering. And compaction is the obvious first step, right? Like the sheer weight physically forces the water out of the pore spaces between the grains of mud.
That's the physical part, yes.
Yeah.
But the sources highlight a much more complex molecular drama driving the actual lithification process. Specifically, it's a chemomechanical feedback loop called pressure solution creep.
Pressure solution creep. That sounds like a paradox. How can pressure cause a solution?
Right, well, to understand pressure solution creep, we really have to scale down to the microscopic interface between individual sediment grains.
Okay, zooming way in.
Imagine two jagged fragments of calcite, or quartz, buried in the subsurface. Because of their irregular geometries, they don't sit perfectly flush against each other. They only make physical contact at very microscopic, localized points.
Right, like if you push two jagged rocks together, they only touch at the very tips.
Exactly. Now, as the lithostatic overburden increases, as more sediment piles on top, all of that immense compressive weight is funneled directly onto those tiny point contacts.
Oh, wow. So we are looking at a severe concentration of normal stress at those microscopic points.
A massive concentration. And in material science, a stress concentrator like that fundamentally alters the thermodynamic stability of the material. The pressure at the exact point where those two grains touch is orders of magnitude higher than the hydrostatic pressure in the fluid-filled pore space, just like a micrometer away.
Okay, so what does that extreme local pressure actually do to the rock?
That localized normal stress directly elevates the chemical potential, or the Gibbs free energy, of the mineral right at that contact point. The mineral lattice essentially becomes energetically unstable because it's bearing way too much physical load.
It's basically buckling under the pressure.
Exactly. And to relieve that stress, the system initiates the first stage of the pressure solution loop, which is stress-induced dissolution.
Dissolution, so it melts.
Not melts, it dissolves. The solid mineral at that highly stressed point contact actually dissolves into a nanometer-scale aqueous film that exists right there on the grain boundary.
Right, really? The rock is literally dissolving itself from the inside out just to escape the mechanical stress?
That is exactly what's happening. It transitions from a solid state into a liquid ionic state at the specific point of maximum pressure.
That's incredible. But those newly dissolved ions can't just stay there at the contact point, right? Or the system would just reach equilibrium and the whole thing would stop.
Right, they don't stay there. They're driven away by the chemical potential gradient. And this brings us to the second stage, diffusive transport.
Okay.
The dissolved ions are caught in that microscopic high-stress zone. But the fluid in the adjacent open pore spaces is only under ambient hydrostatic pressure. It isn't bearing the physical weight of the rock above it.
Right. The pore fluid isn't being crushed in the same way.
So according to Fick's laws of diffusion, the ions migrate out of the high concentration, high stress grain boundary, and they diffuse into the lower stress pore fluid nearby.
Okay, which sets up the third stage, I'm guessing.
You got it.
Once those ions migrate into the open pore space, the fluid locally becomes supersaturated. The mechanical stress that was driving the dissolution is gone, right?
Yes, the stress is gone in the pore space.
So the thermodynamic imperative shifts. The ions precipitate out of the fluid, crystallizing onto the unstressed surfaces of the grains. And this newly precipitated mineral acts as a rigid cement, chemically welding the grains together.
That is a perfect summary. The entire mechanism is this continuous chemomechanical transfer of mass. The rock dissolves at the points of high stress, and reprecipitates in the areas of low stress.
It's like it's cannibalizing itself to build scaffolding?
That's a great analogy. But the true complexity here lies in the kinetic competition governing the rate of this whole process. It is a constant race between the dissolution mechanism and the precipitation mechanism.
Right. The sources refer to this as the battle between chemical rate limiting and mechanical rate limiting. Let's break that down.
Okay, so if the precipitation stage is sluggish, say, the ambient temperature is just too low for rapid crystallization, the dissolved ions build up in the pore fluid faster than they can precipitate out.
They bottlenecked?
Exactly. The fluid quickly hits maximum saturation, the chemical concentration gradient vanishes, and the entire pressure solution pump just stalls out. That would be chemical rate limiting.
Okay, got it. But what about the other side? Mechanical rate limiting.
Conversely, if the precipitation kinetics are fast, the ions crystallize rapidly, filling up the pore spaces and cementing the grains together quickly.
And as the grains cement, their contact area effectively widens, right?
Yes. As the contact area grows, the overlying lithostatic load is distributed over a much larger surface area.
Like spreading your weight out on thin ice.
Exactly like that. And this reduces the localized normal stress at those grain boundaries, which lowers the chemical potential, and the dissolution process naturally decelerates.
So it's a brilliant self-regulating feedback loop. It allows the rock to stabilize its own internal structure against external loading.
It really is elegant. And the crazy thing is, this molecular survival mechanism leaves macroscopic scars that we can actually see with the naked eye.
Right, the stylites. The literature points to stylites as the primary visual evidence of this pressure solution.
Yes, if you look at sedimentary rocks like limestone, you often see these stark, jagged, interlocking dark lines running through the matrix.
Yeah, they look like jagged seismograph readings just frozen right there in the stone.
Those stylites are dissolution seams. When the calcite or quartz dissolves and migrates away, any insoluble materials present in the original sediment, things like clay minerals, organic matter, or iron oxides, they are left behind.
Because they can't dissolve under those specific conditions.
Right, so they just accumulate along the dissolution front. But here's the kicker. The clays aren't just passive remnants, they actively alter the kinetics of the system.
Oh, because the clays lower the activation energy required for dissolution, right? They act as a catalyst.
Yes, exactly. As more clay accumulates along the boundary, it accelerates the pressure solution locally, creating a positive feedback loop that carves those highly irregular, jagged geometries into the rock.
So the stylite is literally the fossilized boundary of a molecular stress event. That is amazing.
It's the physical record of the rock trying to survive.
Right. Now, diagenesis handles this relatively shallow burial phase, transforming that biogenic ooze into limestone. But, you know, the tectonic conveyor belt doesn't just stop there.
No, it keeps going.
When these sedimentary layers are dragged even deeper into the crust, past that 300 degrees Celsius threshold, the rules of diagenesis totally collapse, right?
Completely collapse. We enter the realm of true metamorphic transfiguration.
And to illustrate this phase change, the deep geological analyses we looked at focus on Carrara marble.
Right, a very famous material.
Let's talk about the protolith for this. The parent rock that existed before the metamorphism happened, for Carrara marble, it was a formation called the calcare massiccio.
Yes, the calcare massiccio. This was a massive, incredibly thick platform limestone deposited roughly 200 million years ago during the Hatangian age of the early Jurassic.
Okay, so going way back.
And it formed in the warm, shallow waters of the ancient Tethys Ocean, which basically separated the supercontinents of Gondwana and Laurasia at the time.
So it was actually a very similar biological environment to those Cretaceous epicontinental seas we just talked about, a massive biogenic accumulation of calcium carbonate shells and marine fossils.
Extremely similar, yes,
Yeah.
just a different time period.
But unlike the chalk of Dover, which kind of stayed relatively near the surface, the calcare massiccio didn't. The tectonic architecture of the region shifted drastically during the Cenozoic era, right?
Yes, with the onset of the Alpine Apennine orogeny. Essentially, the European plate and the African Irradian plate converged, and they literally crushed the Tethys Ocean out of existence.
Wow, just bulldozed it.
And the calcare massiccio limestone was caught directly in the collision zone. The tectonic forces didn't just fold the rock, they thrust it deep, deep into the continental crust,
How deep are we talking here?
burying it roughly 10 to 12 kilometers deep.
10 to 12 kilometers, that is insane. At that depth, the physical parameters must be incredibly hostile.
Oh yeah. The lithostatic pressure reached 3 to 4 kilobars, and the geothermal gradient pushed ambient temperatures to anywhere between 380 and 500 degrees Celsius.
Okay, so this is a critical thermodynamic threshold. The temperature is incredibly high, but because of the massive pressure, it's not actually hot enough to melt the limestone into magma, right?
Right, that's the key. The rock remains in a solid state.
It just bakes.
Yes, but the internal architecture of that biogenic limestone, fossil fragments, the microscopic pore spaces, the totally disorganized calcite crystals, that architecture represents a state of very high interfacial free energy.
Okay, and thermodynamics hates that.
Exactly. In a high-temperature, high-pressure environment, thermodynamics demands that the system seek the lowest possible energy state.
So to achieve that lower energy state without melting, the solid rock has to undergo complete atom-by-atom recrystallization.
Atom by atom. It's wild. The physical mechanism driving this is a combination of grain boundary migration and dislocation creep.
Dislocation creep, that sounds so weird. What exactly is that?
Well, the chaotic, irregular boundaries of the original biogenic crystals dissolve and reprecipitate at the atomic level, right? They migrate to form larger, more stable geometric structures. But dislocation creep is particularly fascinating here.
Yeah, how does it work?
Even in a solid crystal lattice, there are microscopic defects or misalignments. Under extreme tectonic stress, these defects physically migrate through the crystal structure. The atomic bonds literally break and reform in a directional sequence.
Wait, so the solid mineral grain is, like, flowing?
Yes, it allows the solid mineral grain to literally flow and change shape without ever entering a liquid phase.
That is bizarre and amazing. So through these processes, the chaotic mess of the Jurassic limestone just rearranges itself into this perfectly interlocking, tightly packed mosaic of coarse, equigranular calcite crystals.
Exactly. The primary porosity is entirely obliterated. It's squeezed totally solid.
And what happens to the fossils?
Every single morphological trace of the original biology, every fossil shell, every structural remnant of the Tethys ocean marine life, it is completely erased from the physical structure of the rock.
It's just gone.
The limestone is completely transfigured into dense, structurally pure marble.
But the data reveals this beautiful paradox regarding the chemistry of this transfiguration, which I found so cool. The physical history is totally destroyed, but the chemical history remains pristine.
It's perfectly preserved.
Because this metamorphism occurred deep in the crust as a geochemically closed system, meaning there was no significant influx of external hydrothermal fluids to, introduce new elements or strip away existing ones, the isotopic signatures of the original marine biology were locked firmly in place.
Exactly. So if you run a mass spectrometry analysis on a sample of Carrara marble today, and you look specifically at the stable isotope ratios of carbon-13 and oxygen-18.
You're not just reading the chemistry of the deep crust.
No, you are reading the exact isotopic composition of the Jurassic seawater from 200 million years ago.
Yeah.
The atomic fingerprint of that ancient biological ocean somehow survived the metamorphic crucible.
Which introduces such a profound intersection between geophysics and human culture. Think about Michelangelo's David, right? One of the most idealized representations of the human form ever created. It was carved from a single, massive block of Carrara marble.
Right.
So following the physical reality of the rock cycle, the David is composed entirely of the recrystallized graveyard of Jurassic marine organisms.
It's entirely made of ancient biology.
The calcium and carbonate ions that form the smooth skin and the intricate details of that sculpture, they were originally extracted from seawater by plankton 200 million years ago, buried 12 kilometers deep, transfigured by the collision of continents, and then uplifted back to the surface.
Michelangelo really only removed the excess material. The tectonic engine of the Earth literally forged the medium.
I can't get over that. It perfectly demonstrates that plate tectonics is the ultimate arbiter of material on this planet. The crust is in a constant state of recycling.
It is. But to truly grasp this transmuting crust narrative, we have to look past the passive, metamorphic changes and analyze the active thermodynamic engine that's actually driving the tectonic plates themselves.
Right, what's actually pushing all this around. Which brings us to the deep mantle dynamics. And this is where we get into that June 2025 study published in Nature Geoscience by the research team led by Emma Watts and Derek Keir.
Right, a huge paper.
The focus of their research is the Afar Triple Junction in East Africa, right?
Yes. This is a region of intense lithospheric stretching where the Nubian, Somalian, and Arabian tectonic plates are actively tearing apart from one another.
It's basically a nascent ocean basin in the making, right? Like a new ocean is forming there.
Exactly. And geodynamicists have long understood that continental rifting in this specific region is driven by a massive mantle plume.
So a mantle plume is like a column of anomalously hot, buoyant asthenospheric material rising from deep within the Earth's interior and impinging on the base of the lithosphere.
Yes. But the classical model of a mantle plume envisions a relatively steady, continuous upwelling of hot material, right? Providing a constant thermal and mechanical pressure against the crust, like a steady flame under a pot.
But the June 2025 study completely upends that classical model, doesn't it?
Totally upends it. The researchers discovered that the mantle upwelling beneath a FAR is not a continuous stream at all. It is highly episodic.
Episodic, so it pulses.
It operates in distinct, rhythmic surges. The mantle is literally pulsing, acting like a geological heartbeat driving the continental breakup.
A geological heartbeat. Okay, but how did they figure that out? Because the mechanism of discovery here is brilliant. We obviously cannot directly observe mantle flow hundreds of kilometers below the surface. We can't just stick a camera down there.
No, we definitely can't. Instead, the researchers relied on the geochemical signatures of the eruptive products that come to the surface.
The lavas.
Right? When the pulsing mantle material undergoes decompression melting and erupts at the surface, it cools into basalt. By analyzing a chronological sequence of these basalts over time, they detected cyclical variations in trace element concentrations and isotopic ratios.
And the study refers to this as chemical striping, like a geochemical barcode.
A barcode is the perfect way to describe it.
So certain trace elements, like rare earth elements, partition into the melt phase at very specific temperature and pressure thresholds, right?
Yes, and by tracking the cyclical depletion and enrichment of these specific elements in the lavas over time, they reconstructed the thermal evolution of the mantle source itself.
Okay, I see.
Each geochemical stripe in the barcode basically represents a discrete pulse of hotter, more buoyant mantle material reaching the base of the plate, melting, and then erupting.
Okay, so the mantle surges hit the base of the continent, the thermal anomaly weakens the rheology of the lithosphere, and the actual physical force of the pulse stretches and thins the crust, incrementally pushing the tectonic plates apart.
You've got it. But the implications of the study go far beyond just identifying the pulse itself. The data reveals a bidirectional tectonic feedback loop between the deep mantle and the surface lithosphere.
Bidirectional. Okay, so taking the fluid dynamics into account, the surface plates are not just passively riding on top of the mantle currents like rafts on a river.
No, not at all. The architecture of the lithosphere actively dictates the behavior of the plume.
Wait, really? The crust tells the mantle what to do?
In a way, yes. The thickness of the crust and the velocity at which the plates are spreading heavily influences how the mantle material flows beneath it. The lithosphere-asthenosphere boundary acts as a rigid topographical barrier to the rising fluid.
Ah, okay. So when the mantle pulse encounters an area where the crust is thin and the spreading rate is fast, such as the established rift axis in the Red Sea, the lithospheric topography is relatively smooth and offers low resistance.
Right. And because of that low resistance, the mantle material can flow vertically and efficiently, resulting in highly regular, rhythmic pulses of magmatism.
So a fluid dynamics parallel would be like laminar flow through a wide, unobstructed conduit, like blood pumping cleanly through a wide artery. The pulse is efficient and regular.
That's a good analogy. But when that exact same mantle upwelling tries to push against the thick, highly cratonic continental crust of East Africa, where the rifting is immature and very slow, the physics change entirely.
Because the thick crust presents a massive rheological barrier.
Exactly. The pulse cannot easily push through, so the fluid flow becomes restricted, severely deformed, and laterally deflected.
It gets blocked and forced sideways.
Yeah. The magma pools, cools, and struggles to find a vertical pathway to the surface, causing the surface eruptions to become highly irregular and chaotic.
Wow, so the crust is actively modulating the mantle's heartbeat.
It is. This feedback loop forces a complete reevaluation of how we interpret surface volcanism and seismicity. The Earth cannot be viewed as a rigid mechanical lid just sitting atop a chaotic convective boiler.
Right, they aren't separate systems.
The interior and the exterior are a tightly coupled responsive system communicating across geological timescales.
It paints a picture of the Earth as a deeply unified thermodynamic machine. The mantle pulses, the crust responds, the plates subduct, the biology gets transfigured into marble. It's incredible.
It really ties it all together.
But even this incredibly complex terrestrial rock cycle operates under a massive conceptual blind spot. Earth has a finite mass. It is just endlessly recycling the exact same inventory of atoms. But where did the initial raw material for this giant recycling engine actually originate?
Right. To answer that, we must turn to the August 2025 paper in the journal Geosciences by Andrea Vitrano and colleagues.
Yes, the paper titled Extending the Rock Cycle to a Cosmic Scale. And this paper systematically dismantles the Earth-centric paradigm of geology.
It really does. The central thesis is that terrestrial lithogenesis, which is just the formation of rocks on Earth, is just a localized late-stage phase of a much vaster cosmic rock cycle.
Okay, so let's walk through this. The paper identifies four distinct overlapping domains of this cosmic cycle. The first domain is stellar and nebular dynamics.
Right.
It posits that the true beginning of the rock cycle actually requires the thermonuclear death of a star.
Which sounds like sci-fi, but it's astrophysics. In the late stages of stellar evolution, particularly during the asymptotic giant branch phase or, during a catastrophic supernova, the star acts as a nucleosynthesis factory.
It's literally fusing lighter elements into the heavy rock-forming elements we know, right? Like silicon, iron, carbon, oxygen, magnesium.
Exactly. And as the star sheds its outer layers or explodes, it violently ejects these newly forged heavy elements out into the interstellar medium.
And out in the freezing vacuum of space as the stellar ejecta cools, thermodynamics dictate that these elements will undergo condensation sequences.
They precipitate out of the gas phase to form solid, microscopic mineral crystals.
And these are the pre-solar grains. We have empirical proof of this domain because we actually find these grains embedded inside primitive meteorites that survive atmospheric entry and land on Earth.
We do. Geochemists can isolate these microscopic crystals of silicon carbide, nanodiamonds, and graphite from meteorites.
And using radiometric dating and isotopic analysis, they have confirmed that some of these nanodiamonds crystallized up to 7 billion years ago, right?
7 billion years ago. Think about that. They were forged in the outflow of a dying star billions of years before our own solar system even began to form.
That is just, I can't even wrap my head around that timeline. Those pre-solar grains are the oldest tangible pieces of the rock cycle we can study.
They are. And they survived a 7 billion year journey through interstellar space, subjected to the sorting mechanisms of the cosmos.
Right, because just as wind and water act as erosional and transport agents here on Earth, stellar winds, cosmic rays, and supernova shockwaves transport and sort interstellar dust.
They push it all around, gradually concentrating it into dense molecular clouds.
Which triggers the transition into the second domain, protoplanetary disk dynamics.
Yes. When a dense pocket of a molecular cloud collapses under its own gravitational weight, it begins to rotate, flattening into a massive accretion disk surrounding a newly igniting protostar.
So this disk is basically the primary geological forge for planetary building blocks. And the paper highlights the extreme thermal gradients within this disk, specifically focusing on something called the snow line.
The snow line represents a stark thermodynamic boundary in the solar system. Far away from the radiant heat of the young protostar, the ambient temperature is low enough that volatile compounds, things like water, methane, carbon monoxide, they freeze out of the gas phase to form solid ice mantles on the dust grains.
Okay, but inward of the snow line, closer to the star, the thermal energy is too high. The volatiles remain in a gaseous state, leaving behind a concentration of dry, refractory rocky dust, right?
Exactly. And that dry, rocky dust is subjected to violent processing. The inner disk is highly turbulent.
How violent are we talking?
Well, the dust aggregates are repeatedly struck by shock waves and nebular lightning.
Nebular lightning, like lightning in space.
Yes, massive transient electrostatic discharges ripping through the gas cloud. These lightning strikes flash melt the dust aggregates, turning them into molten liquid droplets right in the vacuum of space.
That is wild.
And those droplets rapidly cool and quench into tiny, glassy, spherical silicate rocks known as chondrules.
So the formation of chondrules is this massive system-wide metamorphic event. And these tiny silicate spheres then begin to collide and stick together through electrostatic forces and eventual gravitational accretion.
Right, forming the very first true rocks of the solar system, the chondrites.
Okay, and this accretion process drives the material into the third domain, which is asteroidal dynamics. The chondrites clump together to form larger bodies, planetesimals, and asteroids.
But the paper vehemently argues against the notion that asteroids are just dead, frozen relics drifting in space.
Right, they have their own internal rock cycles.
They absolutely do. As these bodies grew larger, the decay of short-lived radioactive isotopes, primarily aluminum-26, generated immense internal heat.
Okay, and that radiogenic heat caused widespread thermal metamorphism inside the asteroids, right? And in the larger bodies, massive internal melting and core mantle differentiation.
Yes. Furthermore, the chaotic orbital dynamics of the early solar system resulted in constant violent collisions between these bodies.
Smashing into each other.
Right, driving impact-induced shock metamorphism and brecciation. The asteroids were, and still are, geologically active environments.
Wow. So eventually, the chaotic accretion of these asteroidal bodies formed the terrestrial planets, which brings us to the fourth and final domain, planetary dynamics.
The one we know best.
Right, this is the Earth-centric rock cycle we mapped out today, the diagenesis, the metamorphism, the mantle plumes. But the critical philosophical shift in Vitrano's paper is the assertion that Earth is not a closed geological system.
It isn't closed at all. It is actively coupled to the rest of the solar system.
The data indicates that the Earth sweeps up approximately 5.2 times 10 to the 7th power kilograms of interplanetary particles every single year.
Which is an enormous amount of material.
That is over 50,000 metric tons of cosmic dust and micrometeorites surviving atmospheric entry and integrating into the terrestrial rock cycle annually.
Manually. The mass of the Earth is constantly increasing through active cosmic deposition.
The terrestrial rock cycle is literally continuously fed by the stellar rock cycle, which leads to this inescapable thermodynamic conclusion. If the Earth is constantly gaining mass from the cosmos, and we know that in roughly 5 billion years, our sun will expand into a red giant,
Vaporizing the Earth's crust, melting the mantle, and eventually shedding its outer layers to scatter the atoms of this planet right back into the interstellar medium.
Exactly. That means the rock cycle is infinite.
The atomic constituents of our geology will be violently ejected back into space. The cosmic rays and stellar winds will sort them all over again. They will condense into new presolar grains, accumulate in a new molecular cloud, and eventually seed the protoplanetary disk of an entirely new solar system.
The process of lithogenesis has no terminal endpoint. It just keeps going.
It is a literal cosmic loop.
We have covered a massive conceptual distance today. I mean, we analyzed the biological graveyards of the Cretaceous epicontinental seas, where plankton altered the carbon chemistry of the oceans to build 500-meter-thick chalk cliffs.
Right.
We zoomed into the molecular thermodynamics of diagenesis, tracking how point contact stress forces solid rock to dissolve and reprecipitate just to survive the lithostatic load.
Molecular survival mechanism.
We watched tectonic forces crush ancient seafloors at 12 kilometers depth, utilizing dislocation creep to forge the pristine marble of human monuments while perfectly preserving the isotopic fingerprint of a vanished ocean.
Michelangelo's medium.
Exactly. We tracked the rhythmic, bidirectional pulses of the deep mantle, fundamentally dictating the rupture of continents. And we expanded our vantage point to the cosmos, recognizing that the dust on our planet was forged in the thermonuclear crucibles of dying stars billions of years before our sun ever even ignited.
And the through line connecting all of these distinct mechanisms is continuous, relentless transformation. The artificial boundaries we impose on the physical world evaporate completely when subjected to the sheer magnitude of deep time and thermodynamic inevitability.
Which brings us right back to the stone I asked you to imagine holding at the beginning of this deep dive. Considering the full scope of the transmuting crust and the cosmic rock cycle, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought.
I love this one.
The atoms comprising the stone beneath your feet or the concrete of the sidewalk outside your window have existed in more distinct physical configurations than the universe has had years of existence.
It's hard to even process that.
It really is. Stasis is an absolute illusion. Millions or billions of years from now, those exact same atoms in that sidewalk concrete might be dragged down a subduction zone, melted in the pulsing mantle, and erupted as a chemical barcode in a brand new basalt flow.
Or, when our sun eventually reaches the end of its stellar life cycle, those atoms will be blasted back out into the freezing vacuum of interstellar space.
Just waiting in the dark to form the planetary foundation of a completely new world. You aren't just walking on rocks, you are walking on condensed, transient cosmic history.